now let's start looking at how algorithms and what sort of ethical issues arise over here. Yeah. So largely we look at these two things. One is biases that are coded in the algorithm itself, right? What is the algorithm trying to achieve? What is the objective of the algorithm, right? Objective function in the algorithm. The other is biases that arise in data-driven algorithms. So here you would be hearing about fairness in machine learning. So we look at that, and then we'll see how there are these feedback loops that happen, which algorithms tend to amplify, right? So I mean, we've already discussed one of these examples of news feeds, right, which can cause polarization, right? So similarly, there are many other ways in which this can impact. And then after that, we look at some solutions, right? How do we fix biases in the data? How do we improve explainability of algorithms so that it improves their transparency? And then other things like having human in the loop system. So when algorithms are being used to make decisions, right, to automate decision making, there, in what ways can humans intervene in that process? Can they appeal against the decision of the algorithm? Can they check the decisions, and only after a human validates, only then that can be decided, right? A binary way in which the debate is often projected is that are biased, and therefore algorithms will make an unbiased decision, right? So decisions like who to convict or who to give a loan and who to deny a loan, right? So humans can be biased on religion, on whatever, right, gender, right, so on. Now algorithms will make an objective decision, right? So that's one side of the argument. But the other side is that the algorithms are not perfect, right? And there are all of these reasons that we'll see because of which algorithms often make incorrect decisions, right? And in many cases, they will be completely limited, right? So that's where automation is not really a solution. Right now these issues with algorithms have been known for a long time, right? One of the earliest papers that I saw is something called Googlearchy by Matthew Hindman from Princeton. So basically what he did was that he looked at the first couple of pages of results on abortion on Yahoo and on Google and on some of these controversial topics, like death penalty, gun control, and so on. Then he took those pages and then he crawled to other pages to whom these were linked to, right? So something like a snowball sampling, that you start with these first 200 pages or so, and then you crawl pages which are linked to these pages, and then you go to those pages and you crawl other pages which they're linked, and so on. So he did this to a couple of depths. Then he looked at what are the sites that ultimately you get exposed to, right? So these were some number, right? Each topic is different, right? So in each topic you got some different number of sites, and then he saw that what is the linkage structure within these websites, that how many sites link to one another. And this is where it became very clear that there's a lot of concentration meaning that a lot of, in this case, right, even 53% of the links are going to just one website, or like 43, 70, 63% of the links are going to the top 10 websites, or like almost all the links are going to the top 50% of the websites. So essentially, there are some websites which are very, very popular and many websites which are not, right? So then the question is that why is this the case, right? Now, right, that why is it that so many websites which have been created by all sorts of different people, why do all of these websites end up pointing to a small set of very, very popular websites, right? So he said that one reason is probably the Google's PageRank algorithm, right? Now, right, those of you who've studied this would know that essentially the way PageRank works is that it solves this, calculates the eigenvector of the weighted adjacency matrix, which is that the popularity of the page is based on how many links are coming into that particular page. Yeah. And then it's also based on the popularity of those pages which are linking in, right? So the popularity of a page or the rank given to a page is proportional to the pages which are linking into it, the number of pages linking into it, and the weight of those pages. So if popular pages are linking into you, you'll be more popular. If lots of popular pages are linking to you, you'll be even more popular, right? So this is essentially what causes, which is phenomena which you can, right, colloquially say the rich get richer, right? Because now what can happen is that once you're using PageRank and somebody is trying to build a website, right, they'll Google will present some results. Now, popular websites are likely to then come up higher in the results, and therefore, in your new website or web page you're putting up, you will have a greater chance of linking to that particular website only. Yeah. So in this way, websites which are already popular will end up getting more and more popular. Yeah. Because essentially the criteria of quality has been equated with popularity. Right? So that is what is leading to this kind of a phenomena, that with PageRank, popularity is equal to quality, right? And that's what Matthew Hindman basically said, that is probably the reason behind this kind of a concentration which is happening, right? Now, of course, I mean, there are many more metrics which are taken into account, right? Right, there are thousands of parameters other than PageRank, right? The grammar, language, right? Sophistication of the language, right? All sorts of things are taken into account. But PageRank is still one of the important parameters over here, right? Right. So essentially, I mean, this is one example where you're seeing feedback effects, that the metric that the search engine is maximizing is popularity, and which then causes popular websites to become even more popular. Right. So essentially, right, the web internet, where you would say that there is equality of opportunity, anybody can create a website, right? But it doesn't translate into equal distribution of wealth, right? Because there are all these intervening processes operating. And this is the same thing which happens in a market. Right. So in a market, you'll say that, well, there's fair competition, right? Anybody can trade with anybody else, right? But there are costs of information discovery, right? Right. There might be many people selling a particular product, but do you have the time to check each and every one of them? No. You rely on search engines, you rely on referrals or by friends and so on. And then if the search process is biased, it will actually then ultimately you will then, and if it is biased towards things which are already popular, you will end up going to those more popular places, right? So Marx basically said that that's true in capitalism, right? That you start with competition, but any small perturbation, because there are costs of information discovery, there are other ways in which large companies can manipulate, right? So manipulate the labor or manipulate with other competition by price cutting and so on, right? They end up becoming more and more powerful. So capitalism ultimately gravitates towards a monopoly situation, right? And that is why you then need regulation to right, antitrust regulation to avoid that. But I mean, we're sort of seeing a similar thing happening even with algorithms, right? So the point is that it becomes important, therefore, to think about this and then to consciously change this, right? Then how would you change it? How would you control that? Okay, you'll say that, well, PageRank is a good measure of quality, right? Nobody would deny that, but then how do you control for that, right? So then you can do certain things, right? Maybe don't show all the top 10 results which are coming by PageRank, right? Maybe 5 of them are coming through PageRank. Maybe 5 of them are new websites where you've looked at other parameters of quality and you're showing those and giving them a chance, right? That once there is a chance of exposure, then maybe people will start linking to these other websites as well, right? So in that way, you're essentially trying to break off this rich get richer phenomenon in some way, right? So algorithms, just like a government regulator, algorithms therefore have this capability, right? Especially when these algorithms are put up in gatekeeping places, gatekeeping like search engines. Yeah. So that's where algorithms can be quite powerful, that the objective which is coded in them becomes important. Yeah. Right. Similarly, here's another very nice paper. Right. So this talks about bias on the web. Now, there's several interesting things they try and show. Right. One is that the kind of web pages that exist, they are typically reflective of some social phenomena. So, for example, they saw in Spain that the websites of Spain were linking to many other websites, right? And the countries or different places to which they were linking was actually proportional to the exports from Spain to those countries, right? So basically, if Spain was exporting more to the United States, then there were many Spanish websites which were linking to US websites. It's essentially the point being that there is an underlying phenomena, right? Global trade patterns and websites, web pages that are being created, they are reflecting that underlying social pattern. Similarly, in Wikipedia, they saw that this is the birth year of important people from 1600s to 2000, and right, men and women. So they saw that on Wikipedia, how many pages were there, pages of men personalities, important men personalities, and pages of important women personalities. Right? So you can see it's completely biased, right? And I mean, this is how the world has been. And then proportionally, right? So here, of course, right, many pages get constructed of people who've been famous earlier. This is now in the recent past, so there's much fewer pages. But you can see that there is a sudden spike now, right? That after, let's say, 1980s or 1970s, right, there are suddenly a lot more pages of women personalities on Wikipedia. That more and more women are being, there are more pages coming up. So why is that happening? Well, because that's largely because societies have been patriarchal for all the time. It's only in the recent, like, last couple of decades, really, that when with feminist movements coming in, that these, right, that women have really stepped into, in some ways, right, allowed into important spheres, right? So the point is that there are these underlying social phenomena which are reflecting what data we are seeing, right? How many websites are there or how many pages are there, right? It's actually completely reflective of the underlying phenomena, right? Like trade relationships over here, or like patriarchy in this case. Yeah? Now what happens is that if you just do a naive sampling, that if you're just returning, right, pages of, right, important people, right? So if you're just returning pages of important people, then naturally there'll be, right, so this is sort of just a heat map that they showed of eye gaze patterns in a search engine ranking, that most people, their gaze is just focused on the first couple of search results, and that's what they just look at, right? So it goes down, right? Right, and same with, like, other places, right? So the point is that if you just have a naive sampling which you're doing of the website of web pages, then it will naturally reflect the underlying social phenomena. So if society has been biased towards certain groups, then it will get reflected in the search results as well. Yeah. So you will just end up reproducing that bias. Yeah. Then there's self-selection also. So this is another very famous paper by Lada Adamik, who essentially analyzed the linking pattern of blogs around the time of the US election. So here, these are liberal blogs by liberal people who with affiliation with the liberals. These are affiliations with the conservatives. And basically, the point is that liberal blogs are linking more to other liberal blogs. Conservative blogs are linking more with other conservative blogs, and there are very few cross links between them. Yeah. So there is a self-selection which is also happening, which is reflective of the current biases, right? So again, right, social biases are being reproduced. If you just sample or you use something like Google PageRank, then you're reproducing those biases in the search results, right? But not just that, people are also biased. So it's possible that people, right, would search for, like, famous men rather than famous women, right? Or in fact, just yesterday, I saw a poster in somebody's office, Men of Mathematics. And so although there were some women also on the poster, but the title of the poster was Men in Maths, right? So you're seeing that because people are anyway biased, so this self-selection can lead to further biases, yeah, and end up reproducing. Right? So essentially, this is a good figure, right, which basically says that there is some data bias on the web. Based on how you sample for the search results, you might reproduce this bias, or you might try to counter it. When these results are presented, there is an interaction bias in how people parse the results. That results at the top would get higher priority, results at the lower would get lower priority. Maybe you can think of different kinds of of presenting search results, right? Instead of presenting it in a ranked list, maybe you can actually show, maybe you can have one more click where you can show 2 or 3 different clusters, and then a person can go into one cluster, or like they can specify, I want results from diverse clusters, right? But this is basically what they call an interaction bias, that based on how you're presenting the results, right? And then what happens? And then there is self-selection bias, like people linking to blogs and so on. And then based on what they do with this bias, like they might be creating new pages. So that again goes into a second order bias effect, which again results in either amplifying the bias, or I mean, if these algorithms and interaction effects and everything have countered, then maybe it might fix some of the bias that already exists out here. Yeah. So the point is, therefore, that algorithms have a very important role, especially in today's age where there is such a lot of information available out there. So in terms of how algorithms sort and sift this information, it's actually going to affect, right, what underlying societal biases the algorithms are reproducing, or are they fixing some of this, right? Okay, so these are all sorts of other examples, like image search for CEO is basically giving pictures of men, right, rather than there's no women in the pictures. This is a popularity of different blogs, right? So a couple of blogs are very, very popular. Most of them are not so popular, right? So if you're biasing towards, if you're considering popularity as a sign of quality, then actually there'll be a lot more. These things will end up biasing a lot more, right? This is in fact related to Amit's PhD thesis. Not sure if this is a graph from your paper, Amit. I didn't remember, but again, it's showing a power law relationship, right? That there are very few people who have more than a certain, right, very large number of followers, but lots of people with very few followers, right? So similar graph as this, just that it's on a log scale. It's instead of showing this as a ranked list, it's actually showing a complementary cumulative distribution, right? Which is, right, that basically any point on this, the way to read this graph is any point on this is showing how many followers or followings are more than a certain probability, right? So that's what this graph is showing, right? That there's a very small fraction, very small probability of nodes who have a lot of followers, much higher probability of nodes who have very few followers. Yeah. So that's the bottom line, right? Around this. Right? And then other studies have, right, looked at also, right, more downstream effects, that how do these search results can actually change your perceptions, right? So this is a study of effect of search engine rankings on how you vote, right? So basically there was a contest between, I mean, this is an experiment, right, between two politicians, Gillard and Abbott. One group is shown pages which are pro Gillard, right, and gradually going to gradually going to pro Abbott. The other is in the reverse way, and then the third group is shown these interleaved results, right? Very strongly pro Abbott, strongly pro Gillard, then less strongly and less strongly, and so on. Yeah, and then they saw that how many people voted, right, before the web search. How were people voting, right? So the group which was shown the first pro Gillard, initially there were 8 people who were pro Gillard and 26 pro Abbott, but when they were shown this sequence, it really changed, right? So many became more pro Gillard, right? So it really flipped. Right. In the other case, where they were shown more pro Abbott, there the change was not significant. Right. So there were 11 and 23 pro Abbott, and that increased by a little bit more. Right. But right, largely it remained. Right. So you saw that it reflected. Right. Where they were shown unbiased, right, mixed results, there was a larger change as well. Right. Did more experiments that instead of just very strong pro to anti spectrum, showed more pro Abbots, but one page at rank 4 which was pro Gillard, and then another one where the rank was increased for one of the opposition roles. And again, these experiments then went on to show that, well, it's actually, right, that they were trying to attribute that this effect that they're seeing of the transitions, this is actually due to the rankings, right? So when they made the rankings less polar, then there was less shift. When the rankings were more polar, there was a greater shift of perceptions among people, right? So again, the point was that what information you see is actually shaping, right? And therefore, right, this is an important element to think about, right? Then we've been talking about Facebook news feeds, right? So there's a paper by Facebook people itself. These are all actually interestingly academics who then went on to join Facebook research, and then they did this study from within Facebook, where they saw the question was that, is the news feed that Facebook shows, right? Does the news feed bias you in some way, right? So the idea is that if you're a liberal and you have a lot of liberal friends, and the newsfeed is essentially showing you more content from your friends, so it's creating a filter bubble, right? So if you're stuck in an echo chamber that you're mostly friends with liberals, and Facebook is then Facebook would reinforce some of that if it's showing you the same results as your friends. So the question was that, is Facebook doing anything to change what you would otherwise receive? Right, so there were a couple of initial characterization studies that they did, where they saw that x-axis is how polarized are some pages. Polarized in the sense that they looked at certain documents, and were these documents shared by liberals or by conservatives, right, based on their self-declared political stance. So in Facebook, you can say, right, you're a liberal or a conservative. It's an optional field, but they looked at people who had declared this field, and they then said that which pages are more polarized, that which pages are shared only by conservatives or only by liberals, right? So this reflects that. One means that they shared only by liberals, only by conservatives. The more you move towards zero, there's a mix. And one thing was that conservatives, right, there's greater polarization over here because you have a greater tilt towards one and a much higher proportion of shares, right? Then there's also strong homophily, that liberals tend to have more liberal friends, conservatives tend to have more conservative friends, moderates are kind of mixed, right? And then they studied this effect, that so they did it in this stage wise manner, that if this is the person that you're trying to study, now this person has some liberal friends, some conservatives, and so on. So based on whatever documents they are sharing, there is a certain potential that this person will look at all of these documents. But you have the Facebook newsfeed algorithm in between, and the algorithm is not going to show you all of these articles because there's too many articles which are being shared. The algorithm will actually show you some fraction, and it will figure out, it will try to decide which of these overall documents should I show. Then out of those documents that it shows, you will self-select. You will click on some of them only. So now, because the study was done from inside Facebook, Facebook had all of this data. So they knew for every user what documents, the universal set of documents that were being shared in their network, which of the documents the newsfeed algorithm actually did show to them, and of those, which ones did they actually click. And then this is the main graph that they ultimately plotted. That in terms of the potential, conservatives have a higher potential of getting cross-cutting content. So this is interesting, that conservatives tend to be better connected, right? So conservatives conservatives are probably looking at a lot more of these documents, right? Whereas, right, randomly outside of their network, liberals have a higher chance, right, of seeing content. But the main comparison starts from here, that there is a gap. And then what Facebook argued is that their newsfeed doesn't change this much, right? So their newsfeed, whatever potential conservatives had of getting cross-cutting content, the newsfeed is basically just sampling from that. It's not really imposing any logic per se of its own. Similarly, liberals are getting exposed to the same manner, right? After that, based on whatever is exposed, liberals do select. There is some self-selection happening. The drop is higher for conservatives though. So conservatives are more self-selective in what they read, right? So that was the bottom line of this study, that they basically showed that Facebook is not intervening, right? But that is precisely the point, right? That is precisely the point, that if you are in an echo chamber, Facebook is not going to do anything for you. You will remain in that echo chamber, right? Facebook is saying it's not my responsibility. If you're in an echo chamber, I'll just show you stuff, whatever is happening in your echo chamber, right? I'm not going to deliberately intervene and try to show you stuff that you don't like, right? So that is what comes out very, very clearly from this study, right? The authors, of course, wrote it with the viewpoint that the algorithm is not intervening and therefore it's good. But from a responsibility standpoint, right, you can actually argue is the exact opposite, that the algorithm should not be neutral. Right? Algorithm should actually try to bring in some kind of a diversity over here. And so now, similarly, right, there are this isn't a measurement study, this is more like a journalist qualitative study on YouTube, that once you start watching some videos and YouTube keeps recommending you more and more videos. So here they showed that YouTube, right, somebody was watching more of radical fundamentalist videos, was just being recommended more and more of those videos, right? So that's why it's called radicalization by YouTube. That's the name of the article, right? And similarly, we've seen similar stuff in WhatsApp. So in fact, a friend, Ram Bhatt, actually did this study at the London School of Economics on misinformation through WhatsApp. And basically, it was very clear that, right, what you choose to forward, what you choose to receive, it's heavily biased towards your own stereotypes. Right, upper class Hindus had a greater tendency to believe in beef-related lynching claims against Muslims, right, rather than other social groups. Upper class Hindus had a greater tendency to believe, right? That's that it was reinforcing essentially their stereotypes. So they interviewed people on their stereotypes, and then they saw what were they doing on their WhatsApp, and essentially the point was that there's a strong correlation between these things. Yeah. Right, you got the main essence, right? That algorithms have an important role on the internet and in shaping behavior. Yeah, right. So one of the main points with this was that, yeah. So I mean, one of the main points was essentially that this is happening because of the objectives that are coded in the algorithm, right? So Facebook chose to not code for diversity, right? Facebook chose to stay neutral. And that has these effects, right? Or PageRank chose to equate popularity with quality, and that has certain effects. Yeah. So that's the main point over here. Yeah. Next, let's look at other issues also, right? And we'll come back to this particular thing. But now what we're getting into is machine learning, right? So what is machine learning? Machine learning is where the algorithms are not based on equations like PageRank, right? Algorithms are not based on randomly selecting whatever is happening in your network. These algorithms are data driven, right? So the rules are what have been learned through the data, right? So these are classifiers. Those of us who are from a CS background will completely understand this. Otherwise, those who are not, you can think in terms of, so you would know about decision trees, right? So you can think in terms of decision trees, for example, that certain rules are learned from the data. That if, right, choose something based on if a variable is less than something, right, you have a particular result. If the variable is greater than something, you have a different result. And that's what is learned ultimately through the classifiers. Yeah. Now these data-driven algorithms can, however, make lots of mistakes. Yeah, actually, maybe we can just look at Ashima's comment. The echo chamber is a huge problem, but the solution is not so easy. Even if Facebook or other companies start to incorporate, people won't read those pages easily. Yeah, they need to start feeding opposing views more responsibly with more proven facts that counter their beliefs. Yeah, so very true, right? So the point is that why is Facebook choosing to stay neutral, right? Because if it recommends articles that you don't want to read, well, you'll spend less time on the website, right? So it's not an easy problem, right? Because on the one hand, Facebook wants to work with counter competition and everything, right? So if it starts being very, very nice, that tries to follow certain social objectives, maybe some other competitor will come up who won't care, and Facebook will start losing business, right? So, and plus, of course, I mean, there's all these other economics connected with all of this, right? So largely, what we're really talking about is, one is, the point is true that algorithms are important and they have an important role to play, right? But when you talk of solutions, is the solution in the algorithm itself? That if you change the algorithm, will it solve the problem? So Ashima's point is that it won't, right? Which makes sense, right? Because there is a self-selection, there is a confirmation bias that is happening in the people itself. So here, what we're really trying to say is that, can algorithms change people's perception? Can we retrain people to be nicer to each other, to be more appreciative of diversity and everything by showing them content which they are unlikely to see, right? So can we this perception retraining, is that possible through technology, or does that perception retraining need other things? Does it need better school education, right? Does it need better messaging by politicians, by celebrities, and so on, right? So of course, I mean, the question is big, right? But right, so we're not so much talking in terms of right what's the best solution, but the point is that algorithms do have a role to play, and ultimately there are conscious choices we're making in terms of how far are we willing to step away from profit maximization objectives in the algorithm to social objectives, right? There definitely would be causal pathways, right? That if you do show more opposing results, like we saw in the Gillard study, right? The Abbott and Gillard study, that if you do show different results, it does change people's perception. So that retraining is possible. It is possible through algorithms, but of course there are other mechanisms also. Some of this retraining might not be possible through algorithms. Some of it is very deeply entrenched in stereotype biases. And you also need many other processes. You also need better school education, you need media literacy, all of that, right? All of that is also important. So it's not like we're trying to say do this and not do that, right? Many things have to be done, but algorithms are also important. Yeah, they have an important role to play. That's the bottom line. Yeah. So let's get back to this, right? So when we talk about data-driven algorithms, these are algorithms which have learned their rules and objectives, their rules, right, from the data itself. And there can be many mistakes over here. So we'll get to this particular example even later, but just to give you a quick overview of what sort of problems happen because of problems in the data, right? So here, this was trying to build a classifier that distinguishes between wolves and huskies. So you show a picture, and the algorithm, which is learned from the data of these pictures. So you show lots of pictures of wolves and huskies, and then you ask the algorithm that is this a wolf or is this a husky, right? And right, it was performing very well, right? There was only one mistake out of like 6, right? So pretty decent. But when they got into understanding what is it that the algorithm had learned, had it really learned that are there some features different between wolves and huskies? Well, actually, it turned out it hadn't, right? So we look at, right, this is called explanation of what the algorithm has learned. And essentially, it turned out that when you show this picture and you ask that, why are you saying that this is a wolf? What parts are important, right? It was actually some patch over here. Similarly, what parts of the image are important for the algorithm to have said that this is a husky? Some parts like this, right? Which is nothing to do with the animal, which is just to do with the surrounding. Same with wolf, right? Something to do with the surrounding. So it turned out that a lot of these pictures of wolves were taken, of wolves were taken in the snow, of huskies were taken on dry land. So actually the algorithm, the machine learning had actually just learned a snow detection algorithm, right? So just because, and that's what it was doing, right? So here you showed it a wolf in a snowy background and it made a mistake. Yeah. So anyway, the point is that this is one way, right? Something called semantic bias, that you need to check the classifiers that have been learned to really understand what features have they learned. Are these even reasonable features, right? That are they really, are you really looking at whatever, right? Facial features or like body shape or something to distinguish, or is it an incorrect thing? Yeah. So another source because of which problems happen in data-driven algorithms is biases in the data. So this is studies on face recognition systems. So now in face recognition systems, the way a lot of these systems were actually constructed is because people have been sharing their photos on social media and everywhere, and all of these photos were actually used to build these algorithms. And there is a much higher number of white people sharing photos than black people, and which could be due to whatever, right? Maybe they have more access to the internet, they use the internet more, they're more on smartphones, they're wealthier or whatever, right? So these were some benchmark data sets. So two of these data sets, as you can see, right, most of the samples were of white males and females, very few of blacks, right? This one is balanced, right? So what happens is that if you learn a classifier which has seen a lot of pictures of whites and very few pictures of blacks, it will tend to perform better for white people, right? So the error matrix that if you see over here, so dark female, dark male, and so on. So there are very high error rates for dark females, right? Much higher than, and similarly for dark males, much higher than for light females and light males, right? And these are now commercial algorithms, right? These are face recognition systems which are supplied by these companies, on which they then tested, right? So so that's the idea, that all of them, right? Microsoft, IBM, some Face plus, don't know which company, right? These algorithms tend to make more mistakes, right? And which makes sense, right? Because the classifiers haven't seen those, so they haven't really modeled that part of the world, that part of reality, and they then therefore make more mistakes, right? So this is another aspect, that you're giving it some positive samples, you're giving it some negative samples for the training, but within these positive and negative samples, what is the mix of different subgroups? So here they've looked at in terms of gender and in terms of skin color, yeah, right, and which are distinctive for different races and different genders, right? So that's why now, if these algorithms are being used in some place, right, maybe they're being used for, like, I asked some of you actually, so this Timble is used for attendance, and it also does face recognition. Not sure, because one student, I asked two students, one of them replied it does face recognition, one of them said it doesn't, and that's probably because we don't know what's happening inside. But hypothetically, right, you can have facial recognition based attendance systems, or even face recognition based surveillance systems, right, like in airports and other places, right? So if there is a higher chance of the algorithm making mistakes on black people than white people, then it's unfair, right? Because you would end up calling black people off, you would do more checks on them, you would investigate them more deeply, and that can right, and so essentially also amplify some of the biases that anyway exist, right, where blacks are discriminated against on so many other fronts. So this becomes yet another aspect, right? But this is something that can be controlled. So if you construct more balanced data sets, and there is, right, so this you can still control. Yeah. Now the third case, right, this is what is most interesting and which is seeing a lot of attention these days, and this is where the whole fairness in machine learning community is working towards, right? So stereotype bias. So this was an explosive study that came out a couple of years back, where some states in the US were using algorithm for predicting risk scores, which was used for bail hearings. Bail hearings, and also whether the person should be released on bail or not, right? The amount of bail and whether they should be released on bail or not. The algorithm was basically producing a risk score, right? That you give the criminal history of the person, and the algorithm uses that to predict a risk score. And race was also one of the variables in this risk score. And what they saw was that risk scores for blacks were typically higher than risk scores for white people, and mistakes, right? So labeled higher risk but did not reoffend, right? So this means that the algorithm said that this person is at a higher risk, right? And then whatever, the person may have been released or something, but actually that person did not reoffend. Yeah. So this is called false positive. So if positive is defined as predicting somebody at a higher risk of reoffending, right? False positive is that your prediction was wrong. You predicted that this person has a higher risk, but actually that person did not reoffend, right? So false positive rate for blacks was much more than whites. Labeled lower risk but did reoffend, right? So the other way, false negative. So here you see the opposite. False negative meaning that you label somebody as lower risk and then you release the person and the person actually did reoffend. So whites had a much higher false negative rate. Blacks had a much lower false negative rate. Yeah. So, right, so now then the question is that why is this happening, right? Why is this classifier making this mistake that it is systematically saying that blacks have higher risk scores, and it's also making these mistakes systematically, that it's systematically labeling blacks at higher risk, but they may not reoffend, and it's systematically labeling whites at lower risk, even though they might reoffend, right? So then, of course, this has become a whole research area in itself now, one of conferences, and it's one of the most important areas in artificial intelligence these days, right? So there's many issues that are being discovered by people and on which there's a lot of research happening. Right. So one is what's called measurement bias. That first of all, how was the classifier built in the first place, right? So to build a classifier, you know that you need a target variable, right? What the variable that you're trying to predict. So in this case, you're trying to predict whether the person will reoffend or not. Yeah, right? But what data are you using for that? What is the ground truth you're using? The ground truth that you have available with you is actually data of re-arrests. You're not policing everybody, right? So the problem that this leads to is that black neighborhoods are more policed than white neighborhoods. So which means that in black neighborhoods you're basically more vigilant, and therefore there is a higher chance that you will end up rearresting black people just because you're observing them more, just because you're policing them more. Now, why are you policing black people more? This is a stereotype bias, right? That, right, just because black neighborhoods, right, you think that black neighborhoods have higher incidence of crime, so you have more police stationed over there, and therefore there are likely to be more rearrests happening over there, right? With white people, you may not really be policing, so white people might be reoffending, but just because you're not policing them, you don't know whether they've reoffended or not, right? So the target variable which you actually want is to track reoffending, but you aren't policing everybody, so you can't build that ground truth, right? So what you do in this case is that you something which is not exactly the ground truth, but which you think is related to the ground truth, which is rearrests, right? So it's not what you actually want to measure. You want to measure reoffending, but you can't measure reoffending because you can't monitor everybody. You can't monitor everybody you've released, and therefore you start taking rearrests. But rearrests is biased. It's a biased measure because you will end up identifying more cases of rearrests in black neighborhoods just because you're policing black neighborhoods more, right? So this is called measurement bias, right? So so you got it, right? Any confusion on this, right? This is a very important point, right? Around all of this, right? Because in many cases, right, you won't be able to measure the target variable to build a good ground truth, right? And therefore you end up using a proxy. But that proxy can be biased, right? So the second problem now, which also happens, right? So one way, well, you'll say that, well, in my classifier, let me not use race as a variable, right? So my classifier, just because, right, my classifier, right, there's higher chances of rearrests happening among black people and so on. My data has more data of black people than white people. But let's say I will fix that with sampling, right? So like in this case, I have more data on black people, less data on white people. So I will do some resampling. So there are ways in machine learning to do that. One way is undersample, right? So if you have 100 scores of white people and 500 scores of black people, then instead of 500 scores of black people, you just take 100 scores randomly from there, right? So you're undersampling. And then there are other ways. There are methods where you construct synthetic samples for oversampling and so on, right? So not getting into that, but there are ways to correct for sampling bias, right? So you say that, well, I'll correct for sampling bias and then I will not give the race variable to the classifier. I will ask the classifier to just learn based on the criminal history and other variables instead of race. So I will blind the classifier on race. Classifier will never see the race of the person, right? Because race is discriminatory, right? But the problem is that also does not solve the problem, right? Because of entrenched relationships. That race is connected with education, it is connected with income, it is connected with your zip code where you live, and the classifiers may end up learning some of these correlations, right? They'll end up learning that people who are less educated have a higher risk of reoffending, or people who are lower income have a higher risk of reoffending, or people who live in a particular neighborhood have a higher risk of reoffending, right? And just because race is correlated, so even though you did not supply race as a variable, but indirectly all that information is still available, and it will get used by the classifier. Yeah. So it's not right. So right, and this is what experiments also then showed that, right. So here these experiments are done on a different problem. of loan applications. So there were 4 racial groups: whites, blacks, Hispanics, maybe, right, Asians, maybe, I don't know. But right, there were 4 racial groups, and this was about loan applications. That should I give a loan or not? One case is max profit. Max profit is where, right, your classifier has learned that, right, all the race variables and everything was supplied to the classifier, and the classifier is basically just trying to maximize overall utility, that I don't want to make any mistakes, right? I want to maximize, I don't want to make mistakes, I want to maximize my profit, which is interest rates that I will get, and so on, right? So here you see that different groups have different success rates. So x-axis is success rates, right? So some groups have a very high success rate that they'll apply for a loan and they'll get a loan, but some groups have a very low success rate that they'll apply for a loan, but their loan will be denied, right? So, right, so the classifiers are basically producing this biased result. That's for some groups it gives them a loan, for many groups it denies them a loan. And if you blind the classifier on race, which means that you remove the race variable, even then this does not go away, right? It reduces a bit. So this blue has shifted a bit here, right? It's shifted a bit here, but it doesn't go away. There is still a big gap, right? And then there are other ways, right? Which I'll just briefly describe, right? So you can force the classifier that, okay, don't just learn on accurate, don't just try to maximize, minimize the loss rate, but also subject it to a constraint that I want to equalize the false negative rates, right? False negative is what? False negative is where you, by mistake, you deny a loan to somebody, right? So positive is you give a loan, negative is you deny a loan, false negative is by mistake you deny a loan to somebody. That person should have gotten a loan, but you've denied, right? So that does not. Right, so that leads to a slightly better situation. Similarly, you consider equal false positive rates and false negative rates. So that leads to a certain situation, right? Then there is demographic parity, where you're saying that I will just give, I will make sure that, right, whoever, right, if white people apply, then only this fraction of them will get a loan. If black people apply, only this fraction will get a loan. So I'm not caring about profit over here. I am just caring about demographic parity, right? That I can give up to 100 loans, and therefore, right, I will just give these loans, distribute them in proportion of how many of these social groups have applied, so that there's an equal chance for everybody to get a loan, right? So the point is, therefore, that blindness alone is not enough, because the variable on which you're blinding, that's likely to be correlated with many other variables, right? And therefore you need other sorts of notions to figure out what is it that you want to do. Yeah, got it? Yeah. So let's look at this also. Now the point is that there are different reasons for preferring certain kinds of fairness definitions, right? So so this is how you think about it. Yeah. And this is a very nice talk that you can watch by Arvind Narayanan. It's called 21 Definitions of Fairness, right? So now the thing is that what do you think is fair, right? Is demographic parity fair, that everybody should have an equal chance of getting a loan, right? Or is false negative rate fair, right? That you want to say that all groups should have equal false negative rate, which means equal chance of a mistake having happened. Yeah. Or is it fair to just give it on maximum profit, right? So which is good for the company giving the loans, right? So what's the right fairness definition to use? Because all of these definitions have different connotations. So here's another example to think about it in the same way, right? That this is now for the same criminal recidivism study, right? This is what's called the confusion matrix, that somebody is actually high risk, and that person also reoffended, right? So which is a true positive, that your algorithm predicted that person is high risk, and that prediction ended up being correct, right? True negative, your algorithm predicted that a person is low risk, and the person also did not reoffend. So that's true negative, right? So this is also good. This is also good, right? False positive is where your person labeled somebody at high risk, but he did not reoffend. So this is unfair on that particular person, that you said that this person will reoffend, but actually that person eventually did not, and therefore the person may have had to pay a higher bail or may have had to stay in jail for longer, and so on, right? False negative is where your algorithm said it that the person is low risk, but the person actually did reoffend. So your algorithm again made a mistake over here. Yeah. So now think of it from the point of view of a decision maker, right? A judge. So what would the judge want to do, right? So what the judge, one way to think about it, that what the judge will want is that nobody can make allegations against the judge, that the judge has been biased. So what the judge would say, that of those I've labeled as high risk, how many will reoffend, right? So the judge wants to show that if I label a black as high risk, the probability that the black will reoffend, and therefore the probability that I was correct, that I labeled somebody as a high risk and that person actually also reoffended, right? So I was correct. So I want to make sure that these probabilities are equal among blacks and whites, right? So which means that true positive, those I labeled as high risk and those who reciprocated, this fraction that of those I labeled as high risk, true positive upon true positive plus false positive, right? This fraction should be equal between blacks and whites. Yeah. So that's what the decision maker would want to do. Yeah. Now, if you think of it from the defendant's point of view, the person about whom the judgment is being made, what is important for that person? Right? For that person, what's important is what is the probability that I'll be incorrectly classified as high risk, right? So from that person's point of view, you would want that this probability should be equal between blacks and whites, right? That the probability I'll be incorrectly classified as high risk, right? That probability should be equal. And what is that? That is false positive, right? That I was incorrectly labeled as high risk, because even though I did not have any plans to reoffend, upon true negative plus false positive, right? So, that the denominator is basically number of cases which are unlikely to reoffend. So from the defendant's point of view, it's they would want that this probability across blacks and whites should be the same probability of being incorrectly. Now, if you think from a society's point of view, right, think hiring rather than criminal justice, that is the selected set demographically balanced. So hiring meaning that somebody is trying to make a hiring decision, and you have a lot of CVs and you want to decide, right? Some of them are CVs of blacks, some of them are CVs of whites. So from a society's point of view, society might want to ensure demographic parity, that I want equal number of white applicants to succeed, right? Equal percentage of white applicants to succeed, equal percentage of black applicants to succeed. So what they would want is false positive plus true positive, right? Which is the total number of blacks being accepted or total number of whites being accepted upon the total upon their population, right? So they would want this to be they would want demographic parity, right? And there are impossibility results, in fact, which show that you can't have all of these at the same time, right? So you have to choose, right? And that becomes the important point, right? That algorithms can make mistakes, right? Because of sampling bias, because of measurement bias, and those algorithms to also follow certain constraints, right? You want those algorithms to machine learning algorithms to learn what to predict, but subject to certain constraints, that I want my false positive rate to be equal, or I want demographic parity, or I want precision parity or predictive value parity. And that becomes a choice. And this choice depends on whose point of view are you thinking from, right? A society would prefer demographic parity. Defendants would prefer what's called error rate parity of equal false positive rates. Decision maker would prefer predictive parity, so that nobody can make allegations on the judgment, right? And right now this becomes important, right? That which definition therefore should you choose? Yeah. And this again, right, going back to what we were discussing with PageRank and everything, right? This is again a choice that we are making, right? A choice that we are encoding in the machine learning algorithm, right? That which of these fairness definitions are we going to employ? Yeah. So next time we look at this in a bit more detail. We'll revisit some of this and we'll also study a little bit about how classifiers are modified to do that, right? And then a couple of examples and so on. The important point over here is this point here, that who decides, right? So the important point is that you have all these different fairness definitions, but who's making the decision of which one should I consider, right? So computer science and so it's great that it's making you specify clearly what constraints do I want my algorithm to follow, right? But who decides, right? And this is where you again come back to the relevance of democracy, right? Now, I mean, of course, it appears unrealistic that going and asking people, right, that would you prefer error rate parity, would you prefer demographic parity? I mean, nobody's going to understand, right? It's hard for even us to understand all these definitions, right? But the point is that this is where democracy and so that it's that who decides, right? It's a case for the legislature instead of the courts, right? Because this is a fundamental choice that society is putting in, right? And again goes back to what we've been talking about in terms of ethics, right? So just like with ethics, right, we see that there's a diversity, right? There are many ways to argue something, right? The same thing we're seeing emerging over here as well, right? That there are diversities of how you define fairness, right? And depending on who you are, right, you might have different ways of considering what is fair, what is not, right? So we look at that again in the next class, but the point is that there are again choices over here to be made, right? And these choices are important because, well, right, if you have, right, that it boils down to, right, what is it that you want to do, right? If you're maximizing your utility, then you're always saddled with these conflicts, that if you build more fairness, right, so if you then you're not just minimizing a loss function, you're minimizing a loss function subject to certain constraints, and you might make, right, you'll give loans to people who are likely to not repay, right? And therefore it impacts your utility, right? And you may not want to do that, right? The more transparent you make your algorithms, it can also impact acceptability. That if your algorithms are more transparent, well, people will start objecting to it. Well, why is this algorithm not talking about fairness, or not, or why is it considering this value of fairness and not some other value? That can impact whether people will accept the algorithm or not, right? Then when you also talk about fairness, it makes automation harder, right? Because you then need human discretion. In fact, GDPR has now said that in these automated decision making on some sensitive operations like loans or recruitment, you cannot have a fully automated decision making system. You have to have a human in the loop, right? So that's now mandated by law. And right, it can improve correctness also, right? So that's important, right? So the point is that there are all these different incentives therefore that come into the picture, right? Incentives of how you define these objectives, which ones you consider, plus there's a diversity of fairness definitions as well, and which is actually a political question, that which should be more important. Yeah. So do take a look at this video, right? Do take a look at this video by Arvind Narayanan, and we look at some of this so that you have a better sense of how some of these things work internally. I think also try reading. So we've been sharing these articles. You should read this one. Yeah, you should read this article. Open platform for e-commerce. Right. Try to come back with some thoughts. Right, based on what we've discussed about algorithms and gatekeeping and everything. Try to come back with some thoughts on what's going on over here. Right. What will happen? What could go wrong? Right, with platform with solutions like this. Yeah.